Pokemon cards, stocks, houses, currency, laundromats? You name it, someone's probably trying to tokenize it. But with over $20 billion of assets and the biggest institutions in the world like BlackRock, Robinhood, and even the US government rushing to tokenize anything they can get their hands on, what's at risk? That's what we're talking about today. What it means to tokenize something, how this trend could affect you, the end user, what companies or projects are actually leading in tokenization, and how Arbitrum stands potentially to benefit the most out of this trend of tokenization. Let's jump into it. So Hunter, what are we talking about here? So simply put, to tokenize something is to have a representation of that asset on the blockchain. The asset in question could be anything I mentioned above, like stocks, currency, real estate, natural resources even, and of course includes some of the more exotic things that I may have mentioned earlier, like Pokemon cards. The blockchain in question varies on the issuer and of course depends on which chain they use, Arbitrum 1, of course, being a flagship chain for this use case. But across all relevant blockchains, there's roughly $20 billion in tokenized assets, as I mentioned earlier, accounting for less than 0.01% of assets globally. Not 1%, not 0.1%, that's 0.01% of all assets globally are essentially tokenized. So we have a lot of room to grow. How do we actually tokenize things? Do we just throw it into some sort of digitization machine that turns objects into dust and then, of course, said object appears on the blockchain? Well, no, that's actually not how that works. Usually, the asset issuer has custody over said physical object, a one-to-one backing. For every asset they have issued on chain, essentially, they have that same asset in custody in real life. The issuers will create an ERC20 smart contract, assuming it's an EVM chain, allowing them to mint or burn said asset on chain with some sort of regularly updated source of truth to prove that the asset they're issuing on chain has underlying value as the asset it represents in real life. So for example, Circle, the company, claims they back every USDC token they've issued on chain one-to-one with cash and US treasuries in real life, sometimes even having more in excess just in case. Now, we won't get into the details about the risks of stablecoins, RWAs in this video, since that's a whole other topic, but just know that every asset you may invest in, of course, has some sort of things that you may want to be asking yourself before getting into them, including who's issuing the asset, ideally a trusted party, how that asset is backed, ideally one-to-one, and of course, how liquid is said asset on chain, ideally very liquid. These are just questions that you want to be asking yourself before you actually, like I said, get into some of these projects. Now, why does any of this matter to you, the end user? Well, tokenized assets tend to be, we'll talk about three different things mainly. One, more liquid. So DeFi, of course, is 24/7. So buying or selling tokenized assets tend to be much quicker than trying to buy or sell a traditional form of said asset. For example, think of how annoying it is to buy or sell real estate. You have to go through tons of legal processes. It usually takes like 2 to 3 or 4 different months. I literally just went through the same thing trying to buy an apartment. It's terrible. And of course, if you're buying or selling a physical object, then you have to ship that and then get the payout after. And it's this whole, crazy process where if it's digital, you click a button and then you get the money in return, right? So definitely more liquid. 2, more accessible. So it's possible that said asset traditionally isn't available in your region, but as we know, blockchain is global, and so tend to be the tokenized assets that live on it. So a good example of this is think about how Robinhood mid last year announced tokenized US stocks for people in the EU. Before this, maybe people in the EU were able to purchase US stocks in some sort of other method or fashion, but now they can easily do it through the Robinhood app in their region by just a click, like I mentioned. So accessibility is a very, very big thing, especially when you start talking about other commodities and assets other than stocks. And of course, more opportunity. By leveraging DeFi, you can have yield built into these tokenized assets, or even just have them embedded into classic DeFi primitives like lending, borrowing, vaults to increase yields or return. Those are the main 3 things on why you, the end user, can actually get more excited about this stuff when you start thinking about the things that you're able to buy now, depending on where you live. And of course, think about what you aren't able to buy quite yet and which companies are potentially working at allowing you to be able to buy those through tokenized assets. So on to the next topic, who's tokenizing things and who can you kind of look at to see maybe there's an asset that you're interested in acquiring, but you can't do it yet. So like I said, Robinhood is one of the big ones. They announced, like I mentioned earlier, tokenized stocks. Now these stocks are actually tokenized on Arbitrum 1 with plans for them to migrate to their own Arbitrum-based blockchain called the Robinhood chain. That's most likely going to happen this year at some point, but it's cool just to see such a big company, one of the biggest fintech companies in the world, embracing the tokenization of stocks and even, they mentioned at some point, real estate, which of course is an enormous market. BlackRock, the world's largest asset manager, launched the BlackRock USD Institutional Digital Liquidity Fund called BIDL. And Coinbase is also attempting at tokenizing social posts on their recently released social media platform, the Base app. Now, some smaller but more innovative projects include USD which essentially is a company that earns yield by providing liquidity to emerging AI companies who have a real collateral. Essentially, you can think about holding their stablecoin allows you to get interest from AI infrastructure loans and US Treasury bonds. It's a really, really interesting project that got a ton of hype when they first launched and have kind of been able to raise their caps as time has went on. And I think it's currently one of the biggest Arbitrum native projects actually on the entire blockchain. Dualmint, who is tokenizing boring things, quote unquote, things like EV chargers, air conditioners, and even laundromats, like I mentioned earlier, where users can earn off the income, which I think is actually pretty funny. But also, again, great use case for, somehow being able to tokenize businesses and have people earn yield off of them. It's a whole nother primitive that I think is slowly taking off. And then, of course, you have a state protocol, which essentially is leading in tokenized real estate, where users can earn off of rental income. All are great projects, Arbitrum native, and leaders in their own right in and out of the Arbitrum ecosystem. Very excited to mention those guys alongside a slew of other teams that are also building tons of stuff in tokenized assets, real world assets, stablecoins, whatever name you want to use, they're doing it. The craziest thing is that tokenization does not stop here. Governments around the world have been making tokenization and blockchain adoption one of their top priorities. Why, you ask? Well, amongst some of the reasons I mentioned earlier, it's a great way to strengthen one's currency internationally. For the US in particular, to maintain the US dollar's global dominance. In parts of the world where inflation runs high for the local currencies, holding an on-chain version of the US dollar is one way they can hedge against the rapid decline in the value of their own local currency. So in essence, blockchain rails is very quickly being seen as a fast track to grow power and dominance for their own currencies. So blockchain equals power. Remember that. And of course, lastly, why do I think that Arbitrum is best positioned to benefit from all of this? Let's run through it. Number one, Arbitrum is one of the most battle-tested and time-proven blockchains in general. Originally launched in 2021, with tech being designed before even Ethereum was built, great tech that works today and will continue to work as time goes on is kind of just part of the DNA of Arbitrum. Arbitrum is the only ecosystem that has a top 5 chain, Arbitrum 1, and a top 5 stack, the Arbitrum chain stack, so teams can choose to launch on Arbitrum 1 or deploy in their own Arbitrum chain and capture all the revenue themselves. And Arbitrum is already working with some of the most innovative, leading fintech companies in the entire world like Robinhood. And the cool part is that they're kind of pioneering this launch and migrate model, where I mentioned earlier, they can launch on that top 5 chain, Arbitrum 1, and then migrate to their own top 5 stack with the Arbitrum ecosystem. And then, of course, when the time is right and when the chain is designed, they can finally go ahead and move stuff over and still benefit from the bridge between the two. Second, Arbitrum is a credibly neutral, high liquid environment. There is no fintech exchange arm at Arbitrum that would deter bigger players like Robinhood or even Hyperliquid, for example, from deploying or using it as a source of liquidity, unlike Coinbase with Base or Binance with BNB Chain, for example. And of course, Arbitrum has DAO-ran programs to incentivize tokenization on the platform. STEP is a program that converts a portion of the DAO's treasury into more stable, yield-bearing assets such as tokenized US treasuries and government money market funds. This encourages the development and the use of RWA protocols on Arbitrum by providing liquidity and capital to approved applicants. BlackRock and Franklin Templeton, by the way, were actually seen on the forums applying for this. And in this case, BlackRock really means securitize. So programs like these incentivize some of the biggest asset managers in the world, and even just anyone looking to tokenize anything, to come to Arbitrum first and prioritize their launch there, because there just happens to be tons more liquidity available for them to benefit from. So what do you think? Is tokenization the future? Are there any tokenization or RWA platforms that you're interested in? Let me know in the comments below. And of course, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.